There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here is another book haul. First up, we have this little essay, or maybe it's the transcript of a lecture. Yes, Comparing Mythologies by Thompson Highway. Thompson Highway is a two-spirited indigenous writer. I don't know whether he would call himself a Canadian, but he lives in Canada. That's the best way I know how to say it. And this is the transcript, Comparing Mythologies. It's the transcript of his lecture, the Charles R. Bronfman Lecture in Canadian Studies. He is a playwright, novelist, and important person on the Canadian cultural scene. And this talk is the ways in which Canadian culture is shaped by the mixture of Aboriginal and Western mythologies. Bronfman was a whiskey family, I think, from Quebec. This was published in 2003. The lecture was given in 2002. And the introduction is 10 pages by somebody else, and then about 30 pages for the lecture. This is a Blame It on Ronan Hessian acquisition, one that he raved about in our Zoom chat. Love Notes from a German Building Site by Adrian Duncan. It has the most unpromising title and premise of any book I own, but he loved it and I want to try it. So it is an Irish novel set in Berlin. So Paul, the protagonist, is a young Irish engineer and follows maybe his girlfriend Evelyn to Berlin and begins work on the renovation of a commercial building in Alexanderplatz. Ronan raved about it, so I got it. So, Irish novel set in Berlin about civil engineering or something like that. Look at the cover. I Shall Let You Know. This is a non-fiction title. You can tell that it's print on demand or whatever. It's such a glossy cover. Police Line Do Not Cross. Silencing a Canadian Police Whistleblower by Kelly Donovan. I didn't know anything about this, but when I was searching for books to read to sharpen my critique of policing, especially in a Canadian context, this popped up. The author, Kelly Donovan, was a police officer in Ontario, and she tried to blow the whistle on police brutality or police violence, and she was disciplined. And this is one book that she has written about that. The police, anywhere that I know of, and I know quite a bit about what's going on in Canada and the States, and I assume that I could broaden my critique to just about anywhere in the world, is a corrupt, violent, evil organization that needs to be so reformed that it would be unrecognizable to us today. In other words, that they wouldn't be racist and they wouldn't kill innocent people. And they wouldn't be corrupt, and they wouldn't be an extension of white supremacy in North America. And this book I want to read to sharpen that critique. Published this year. It's her second book. Here's one I'm hoping to get to before the end of the year. It's a 2020 release, A Burning by Megha Majumdar. Majumdar was born in Kolkata, India, and lives in New York City. This is her debut novel, and I've heard nothing but praise about it. It has a very modern setting, 3 characters in India, one of whom gets falsely accused of committing a terrorist attack because of a post she carelessly put on Facebook, and so on and so on. I'm really curious about this one. Another new release, I'm not sure that I'll get to it this year, but I certainly have a good feeling about it. Inheritors by Asako Serizawa, who is a Japanese writer who writes in English and lives in America. And this is her, I think it's her debut, collection of short stories. Yep, it's her debut. She was born in Japan and grew up in Singapore, Jakarta, and Tokyo. Now lives in Boston, and this has gotten really great reviews. So I believe it's connected short stories. It's like a short story cycle, but let's see, is that right? Yes, the story of a family over a century and a half, 5 generations of a family scattered across Asia and the United States. Yeah, there's a family tree, which I love. I like to share opening sentences or paragraphs if they have some kind of a standalone vitality, and so far in this book haul, none of them have, and that does not prejudice me against the book, but if you're wondering why I'm not sharing them, because so far none of them have had that, but maybe some of the next few will. This was almost a mistaken purchase, but I'm glad I have it anyway. A Luminous History of the Palm by Jessica Siguera. I thought it was a translated little book. It's so tiny, and I saw it on Twitter, and I could get it for like $10, including shipping from the publisher Sublunary Editions. And I got it, and then I realized I remember I was still in bed on Twitter. I ordered it, and I wasn't awake enough to realize it's not in translation. So I will still read it, of course. And what do we got here? Jessica Siguera has published a novel and a short story collection and an essay. And what the heck is this? I see that it can be read as a series of small portraits through time or a revolutionary tract. And somehow it's related to not this palm, but these kind of palms. And the opening little piece is called How to Do Things with History. And I'm going to read it to you because this may actually be a pre-bail. Listen to this. How to do things with history. I don't know why others write books. I began to write this book because I love to imagine myself in other lives. I began to write this book because I was thinking about history. I began to write this book in search of more luminous associations. A luminous history seeks to make connections beyond the surface level of great events and statistical data. To do so, it takes a symbol, any symbol, as a seed to create anecdotes. The luminous begins from the small and everyday, the particular and peculiar. Well, that was fine until the last couple sentences. I don't really believe in symbols, and anybody that talks about symbols, I probably don't want to read what they have to say. Anyway, it's too small to just not even try it, but that dampens my anticipation somewhat. In another book haul that you hopefully have seen by now, I hauled another book of poetry by the African-American poet Nikki Finney. This is another one that I special ordered that was a National Book Award winner. Head Off and Split. I believe Nikki Finney lives in Kentucky, and this is her collection that won the National Book Award, and it was published in 2011. And this is a memoir by the fabulous Irish poet Evan Boland. A Journey with Two Maps, Becoming a Woman Poet. I have read one small collection of her poetry. She died a few months ago. I love her poetry. I remember studying it in an Irish lit class 30 years ago or something. When I found out she'd written a memoir, I thought, okay, I need to read her memoir. This is actually not a memoir. These are a collection of essays. And the last one for this particular video is this novel translated from the French that I received. It's a Europa Editions hardcover. I think it's the first Europa hardcover I've ever seen. Valerie Perrine's Fresh Water for Flowers. Very newly translated from the French by Hildegard Searle. And it is Perrine's English language debut. The main character, a woman, is a caretaker of a cemetery in a small town. And her life is disrupted one day when the local police chief insists on scattering the ashes of his recently deceased mother on the gravesite of a complete stranger. If that premise doesn't hook you, what's wrong with you? It's quite a chunky book, more than 400 pages. This sounds really interesting. Hey, this is a December 23rd, 2020 addendum. 5.5 months later, I am editing this book haul that I filmed back in August, and I deleted at least 2 books, maybe 3, from the video because I had already read them and reviewed them on my channel. I thought a retroactive book haul introduction to these books isn't going to be very interesting when you've seen the aftermath. So the video is very short. It was like under 10 minutes, so I'm going to add a couple more recent acquisitions, newly in the house, to make this video a decent length. The first one is Mendelssohn on the Roof by Jiří Weil, translated from the Czech by Marie Wynn. And I talked about this book, I don't remember, I'll put a link to the video where I talked about it. I talked about it in some tag video or something. It was a book that I had my eye on, and I had a dickens of a time finding a copy that I could get to Japan affordably, and then suddenly I found this on a website that sells books online that shall not be named, and I got it for very cheap. This edition published in 2011, the original novel published in, I think, 1960, and it is about an SS officer ordered to remove the statue of the Jewish composer Mendelssohn from the roof of the Prague Academy of Music. That's the opening premise. That's all I want to know. A darkly comic and deeply moving novel, and sounds so much like a Sean book. Weil died in 1959. He was born in 1900 in Prague, one of the best-known writers in Central Europe in the 1930s. And finally, this is a big tome of recently translated history that just captured my imagination. It is called The Last Libertines by Benedetta Kraviri, translated from the Italian by Aaron Kerner. I'm sure some of you out there have heard of it. When I heard about it, I had to get a copy. This is a work of history about 7 French aristocrats who were young at the time that the French monarchy fell. Or the first time. At the time of the French Revolution. And it is about what befell them, how they kind of changed before the revolution, and what happened to them afterwards. And it's that kind of a history. Another phrase that jumps out at me from the synopsis is that the book reveals the keenness with which they experienced this crisis in the civilization of the Ancien Regime, of which they themselves were the emblem. Am I pronouncing Ancien Regime correctly? Just sounds like such a Sean book. Kraviri is a professor of French literature in Naples. I'll just read the opening sentence from the preface. This book tells the story of 7 aristocrats whose youth coincided with the French monarchy's final moment of grace. A moment when it seemed to the nation's elite that a style of life based on privilege and the spirit of caste might acknowledge the widespread demand for change, and in doing so reconcile itself with Enlightenment ideals of justice, tolerance, and citizenship. And I think this book, which is just a gorgeous hardcover book, look at that cover, is going to show us that it wasn't that simple for these 7 aristocrats. Nonfiction November, here we come. 2021, I think this is going to be on my list. Now we're finished. Thanks for watching.